Welcome to the advanced world of app development with our next project, the bucket list. This app journey is packed with valuable lessons and you'll be learning a lot of cool things on this project. In the first part, we'll unravel the magic of APIs or connecting our Flutter app to the internet. For that, we'll be creating a dummy API on Firebase to get a feel of how they work. And then we'll test it out using a popular tool called Postman. We will then understand the concept of async, await and futures, which are essential tools for handling data that takes a bit of a time to arrive. We will then work on using API data into our Flutter app, and then we will also be working with the loading state indicators. Alright, and in the second part, we will be stepping our game and we will be learning the multi-screen navigation in Flutter. Get ready to work with multiple screens in our app. We'll also be working on filtering data from the list, exploring popovers, master the art of passing the data between the screens, and so much more in between. So buckle up for the advanced app making adventure where each lesson unlocks a new level of Flutter mastery. In this lesson, we'll be cloning bucket list app and have a look at the source code, and we'll try to launch it. Now, before we clone it, please note this down. In this Flutter project, I am using my personal Firebase project for API request. And if there's something wrong with my Firebase project, you might not be able to get the expected behavior once you clone this project and run it on your emulator. So look out for that, alright? If this does not launch on your emulator, no worries. You can still see all the code inside of this project. And as always, we will be creating this project from the scratch. So even if it does not launch on your emulator, no worries. Having said that, let's clone this project. So as always, move into github.com/susandstc, click at repositories, search for Flutter, and click at this bucket list Flutter course. Alright, now click at code and then copy the URL. Now open up the project directory, cmd to launch command prompt, or you can open up your terminal over here and then git clone the URL. Once this is done, move into the cloned folder, open command prompt or terminal, and then open VS Code using code dot. Once this is launched on VS Code, let's clean the project, run pop-get, and then launch the emulator and start debugging. So it's running fine in my device because currently my Firebase account is fine. But when you clone this project, this might not work. There might be something wrong with my Firebase project. Alright. So if this does not run as expected or as you are seeing here, then no worries. We can still see all the code inside of it and we'll be working on this project from the scratch. Alright. But if the app is running fine on your side too, then you can explore all the features of this app and feel free to explore all the code inside of it, whether it's running or not running on your device. So let's move into the next lesson where we'll be creating this app from the scratch. So I'll see you there. In this lesson, we'll be setting up dummy API for our Flutter project. Now there are lots of API available in internet for testing, like OMDB for Movies API, Rapid API and so on. But some of them are not stable and some of them have limits, alright? So setting up our own API is a much stable approach. So we'll be building our own test API using Firebase. Now typically Firebase is not used for API only, it has way many features. But for this section, we'll be using Firebase for creating a dummy API, alright? So navigate into firebase.google.com and click at get started. Now you must be logged in for this. So if you are not logged in yet, go ahead and log in your Google account. Once you are logged in, click at create a project. Now you can name your project anything. So enter your project name here and click at continue. And we don't need this Google Analytics here, so disable it and then create a project. Once your project is ready, click at continue to get started. And now we are ready to create our dummy API. So click at build and click at real-time database. Now typically when working in Firebase, we often use this Firestore database. But as we are trying to create a dummy API, we will be using this real-time database, alright? So now click at create a database. And you can select any location over here, next. And now we need to set the access to our database. So let's start in locked mode for now and we'll be modifying this later. So enable. And now our real-time database is ready. And as this database will be public, let's change the rule of this database. So click at rules. And let's set this read and write to true so that our database can be accessed and modified from anywhere, alright? As this is a dummy database, we are allowing this read and write permission. But whenever we are working with a real API, it has some level of security in it, like authentication and so on. Alright, but as this is a dummy API, let's not worry about that. So click at dismiss. And now we are ready to test APIs. Alright, so this is the API endpoint. Let me take you to the documentation. You don't have to open up this website, just have a look at how API documentation looks like. Alright, so API documentation defines how you can send a request to a server or how you can communicate with the server. When working on a real API, backend developer will provide you with API documentation. Alright, and this is the API documentation of Firebase REST API. Seems a little complex, but no worries. We'll have a look at a step-by-step process for accessing this API and communicating with the server. Alright, and now we have our API and API documentation ready. It's time for us to test this API, and for that we'll be using Postman. Postman is a simple software that allows us to test API with ease. So navigate into postman.com for downloading Postman on your device. So select your device and download Postman. Once downloaded and installed, let's create a Postman account. You can create it from here or click at this lightweight API client and then create an account. I highly recommend that you create an Postman account. Creating an account will enable all the features of Postman. This account creation process might look a little different on your device, but that's fine. Go ahead and create a Postman account, alright? Once account is created and logged in on Postman, this is what your screen should look like. So now let's create a new collection for our API. So click at this plus icon and let's rename it to Flutter API Test. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll be working on testing APIs through Postman. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be working with request in Postman. So let's go ahead and create a new request. And let's rename this request to add initial bucket list. And as we are trying to send a data to the server, we'll be using this put method instead of get. Alright. So the first thing that we need for sending the request is the API endpoint. And our API endpoint is this reference URL. Alright. So copy it and paste it in the URL section. And now we need to send JSON data into this endpoint so that it can be added in our database. Alright. So let's understand what JSON is. So if you look into the definition of JSON in Wikipedia, you can see that JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it is an open standard file format and data interchange format, meaning that using JSON we can communicate between the client and the server. JSON can be used to send data to the server, or it can be used for getting the data on the client through the server. Alright, so we can get the data or send the data using this JSON data format. So this is what a typical JSON data looks like. So let's break down this data so we can understand JSON better. So at first you can see these big brackets enclosing everything inside of it. In JSON or in JavaScript we call them array, and in Dart we call them list. And inside of this JSON data list there are some data, and this data is neither string, number, integer or anything that we have studied before, right? So what are these data? These data that are enclosed by curly braces are called objects in JavaScript or JSON, and we refer to them as maps in Dart. Map is an advanced data type in Dart, and unlike list, they are enclosed with the curly braces. Now for understanding JSON better, we need to have an understanding of maps. So in the next lesson, we'll be understanding what maps are and how they are used in Dart. So I'll see you at the next lesson.